Good evening. 3 years ago, at one of many campaign forums, the question came up, what are you going to do to replace Chief Jerry Dyer when he retires? Thank you. And I said, I'm going to hold a national search and do the most comprehensive, transparent recruiting the city of Fresno has ever done. So I'm here tonight to fulfill my campaign promise that we're going to do that. Jerry Dyer, who's been with the PD for 40 years, has been the chief for 18 years, probably the longest chief, I think, in the United States right now, will retire in October this year. And this is phase one of 5 community meetings that we're going to ask you, the citizens, what kind of qualities you would like to see in a police chief, what are the issues you see out there for the chief. And this decision will probably be one of the biggest decisions I make in my first term as the mayor of Fresno. And whoever I choose will have an impact on everybody's lives in this city. So there's also an online survey. You can go to the city website. It's in English, Spanish, and Hmong. That'll go through May 31st. You can submit your ideas tonight. And this will pretty much wind down in about the end of May. Then we're going to take the information that we've gathered from all these meetings and the online survey and give these to our recruiting company to say, this is the kind of chief of police the city of Fresno is looking for. And between then and October, we're going to select a chief. There'll be panels. It'll be a pretty comprehensive process. So welcome tonight, and we appreciate your comments. We're willing to answer any questions you have, too. Thank you. Robert?
The person who is actually going to formally hire the next chief, Wilma Kwan. Do you wish to say something, Wilma?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Wilma Kwan. I'm the city manager. I just wanted to thank you all for being here tonight, and I echo the words of the mayor that I do think this is the most important hire that this administration will make with the police chief. Jerry Dyer's leaving big shoes to fill, so again, we welcome all community input into the process, and we do hope to have the new chief on board by September of this year. So again, thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Oh, there are translators here. If anyone needs a translator, please raise your hand. If not, we're good to go. Okay. Any questions that need interpreting, we will do. We have all bases covered. All good. In my experience, usually folks know enough from my 20 years on the bench to know that they would desire a translator, but thank you very much. Look, I know this is an exercise in optimism, but this is a smaller group, and it would be really cool if you could kind of work your way towards the front. Just don't be bashful. The questions and the comments will be no harder from the front than from the rear, but that would be, feel free. This is designed to be a community forum. I thought that perhaps, before we lay out the questions, which I think most of you are familiar with, to talk a bit about the task that the city of Fresno and all of us in the community are going to be undertaking in a direct or indirect way. As Mayor Lee said, we are replacing, well, strike that. We're not going to replace Chief Dyer. We will have a new police chief after 18 years of Chief Dyer. 40 years he has spent with the City of Fresno Police Department. It's clear he has difficulty keeping a job. The process, which I think many of you have read about, there's a national search firm. There will be applicants. They will be winnowed down. There will be a number. There's 4 more of these district policing forums. There will be a number of other forums. The mayor or the city manager will select a group to be involved in a further winnowing down, and ultimately by, I think, October 1st, we will have a new police chief, because I think that's Chief Dyer's last day, although he's said that before. I think, though, this is the real deal. This is as I think all of you recognize, a huge job. The chief is the CEO of a hugely large organization, 1,122 authorized positions, of which 705 are officers, 855 are sworn, the chief, 4 deputy chiefs, 7 captains, 21 lieutenants, 97 sergeants. And what is different from what many of us are used to, this is a 24/7 task. This is not 8 in the morning until 6 at night and then your staff goes home. The Fresno Police Department has folks on duty around the clock. 3 shifts, and they intersect a little bit for some staffing and reasons that are obvious. In addition to the 1,122 authorized positions, there are 287 civilians, emergency services, crime scene technicians. The makeup currently of the police department, 721 men, 92 women, 48.5% are Caucasian, 38.9 are Hispanic, 5.8 African American, 4.4 Southeast Asian, and 2.4 Pacific Islander. The police department is that gets into great detail, but basically there's 4 divisions, including the 5 areas that we're speaking of this evening, of which we are one in Northwest. This police department responded to more than nearly 425,000 calls last year. Now you can break that down, number of officers on a shift divided by, in each district, divided by 3, and there may be a little staffing emphasis here and there, not counting the ones that are sick, injured, or on vacation. It's an interesting exercise that is a challenge to anyone in management, particularly in the C-suite or the senior chair in the corner office. That is what, among the things we'll be looking at, you'll be looking at, and the selectors as we select the new police chief. What are the qualifications? A graduate of an accredited college or university with a bachelor's degree in political science, police science, public administration, or a related area, 10 years of increasingly responsible law enforcement experience in a capacity in a large metropolitan law enforcement department of similar complexity. There's a whole litany of police officer standards and training. FBI has an executive program. All of those things will be looked at by the selection committee and ultimately Ms. Kwan with the input, I'm sure, of the mayor. And I'm sure of the input from members of the city council, because that's the way life works. So the chief salary range is from 183 to 228 plus some benefits. You might say that's a lot of money for this kind of an operation. I will respectfully suggest to you that it's similar or less than what folks in the private sector for a similar job makes. Is there oversight of the Fresno Police Department? You bet. The oversight, frankly, is with you. The oversight is with the media. The oversight is more formally with the Office of Independent Review, who is here this evening, who is, as you may recall from reading the media as this was undergoing its birth, independent to review certain activities of the police department and issue a report independent of the Fresno Police Department or anyone else. We have, interestingly, in addition to the 1,122 employees, we have 24 reserves. I say we have. The department has 24 reserves, 94 chaplaincy volunteers, 50 citizens on patrol, and 27 volunteers, and as well as a litany of other folks. So I say that just to give us some idea of the complexity and the magnitude of the job that the person that we hire is going to be responsible for. In the material that you got, there's 4 basic questions, and you may expand on them as you wish. First, and looking at this group, I know everybody will be duly respectful in your comments and your language. The general question areas are, and we can repeat those if you need them. What are the challenges in this city that you would like the new police chief to address? The challenges you'd like to see addressed. What issues facing the city should a new police chief be aware of and understand? Number 3, what qualities are most important to look for in the next police chief? And then the omnibus question, is there anything else the city manager should consider when selecting the next police chief? Now, if you are bashful and don't wish to speak the microphone, we have questionnaires that you can complete and fill out. If you do speak, we would like you to limit your comments to 1 or 2 minutes. I think we'll have plenty of time for everyone to be heard. With that, who would like to posit the first question or comment? Yes, ma'am. If you would be so kind as to state your first name and the general area of the community that you live in.
I intended to. My name is Jackie Newman. I live in the 93722 zip code, which is about 3 miles from here. I'm a retired public school administrator. I provided public service for a career of over 35 years. And I arrived at the conclusion with that experience that Fresno, our strength is our diversity. And so the challenge that I would hope that our new chief would expect and accept is that there's a need in Fresno to bring our communities together. And while I live in Northwest Fresno, I'm a Unitarian Universalist, and if you know anything about our beliefs, you know that we believe diversity is strength and that all folks are important, accepting them just the way they are. So I would like to see the communities in South Fresno and North Fresno brought together in a more amicable, positive way. I expect this consideration to include diversity as they determine candidates, and certainly I would like to see some women, some strong, qualified women in the pool of candidates.
I have a follow-on question, if I may, but I can't help but look at the sign over the wall.
We all fit together, absolutely. And we accept people just the way they are. A representative candidate that represents our diversity and certainly gender equality would be extremely important in my mind.
Well, you may have read yesterday what our Fire Chief, Carrie Donis, is doing. She's going to continue to kick down a few doors in a very positive way by education, training, and experience.
Thank you very much.
Well, let me ask you this. You were in education for probably a few years.
Classroom teacher, district office, public school principal. I worked for Native American tribe as an education leader, on and on.
How have you seen the concept of diversity blossom within the school system?
In the school system, it's extremely important, and my friends and family hear me say this all the time, that the diversity needs to come together in a learning environment. I understand sports. I understand playing together in the community. I also can even understand, in some ways, demographic shifts in communities. But the important part is bringing students together in a learning environment where they learn to respect and honor differences in culture, differences in thinking styles, and differences in the way in which they approach new learning. Really important.
How would you urge the new chief to inculcate that concept even more than it has been?
By opening the line of communication and visibly participating in events across these community lines. I see the effort being made, but it hasn't been completely successful, and I hope it will continue. And diversity in the choice of these candidates is going to be extremely important. Participation and valuing diversity and gender.
Perfect. I may come back to you later.
Thank you.
Who would like to ask the next follow-on or independent question? You know, this is rather like your college professor or high school teacher. If you don't volunteer, you may be asked a question, and that would not be good. Pardon? A new question? A comment? Statement? Absolutely. Come on up. Just if you give us your first name and the area of town that you live in, that would be terrific.
Okay, my name is Debbie Nard, and I live in the Faulkner School area.
Right
Is that
around
good
the
enough?
corner.
Okay.
That'd be good. Thank you
Okay.
for being here, by the way.
Well, I actually would like to thank the mayor for the opportunity, giving us the entire city the opportunity to weigh in on this issue. I would also like to thank the city communications coordinator for the advance notice so that working citizens could have the time to think about this issue and arrange to come to the meeting. I am not a community activist, and I do think that community activists have far too great a role in running government in this city. I have served on the Chiefs Advisory Board when Jerry was a new chief here, and I also did Neighborhood Watch for Northwest Fresno for approximately 5 years for the whole area.
Now, I don't want to interrupt you, but you said you're not an activist, but you're a pretty active member
I'm
of the
an
community.
activist because I had a very bad problem in my neighborhood, a drug house, so that's why I became. So I'm a very concerned citizen who's very interested in the police department and how its resources are deployed, and I've been watching this for a very long time. And I just want to say that Northwest Fresno has been, until recently, a much larger geographical area with the same amount of officers as other areas. And over the years, when we had a lot of the gang problems, our officers were deployed. So there were some things in this area that were, from time to time, I would say, neglected. Also, people in Northwest are, in some respects, not as amenable to spending their evenings going to neighborhood watch meetings and getting together as posses to get the police to solve a problem in their neighborhood. They work, they have elderly parents, they have children, their schools don't have teacher's aides, so they have to go and be a teacher's aide and volunteer to pay for the playground equipment. It's a different thing. So as much as there is diversity, we are different over here, and we have different needs. So I would like a police chief that knows about those different needs. I also realize that we need someone who has the administrative skills to run the department and someone to get staffing in the department to the needed levels. The one problem is we haven't had proper staffing levels for the size of our city for a long time. So that would seem to me to be a priority for this city to get us to that. I would also think one of the best things about Jerry Dyer was that he loves Fresno, and even after 40 years, he continues to love being a police officer. So I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good motivation for the troops underneath him. I also want someone who's looking to stay in Fresno, not just to use this position as a stepping stone for the next job. We went through several chiefs before Jerry Dyer took over, and that's disconcerting for the city to keep changing. You know, just about the time they start to know what's going on, they're gone. So we'd like somebody that really wants to stay in Fresno. We've had about 6 district commanders in Northwest Fresno in the past 19 years. Only 2 have actually lived in the district, and that doesn't provide us with someone who has a lot of historical knowledge sometimes of our area. So the continuity in the chief would be great because we've experienced it over here in the Northwest. I'd also like a chief that could educate the city on how resources are allocated and where they come from. Northwest is often portrayed as a place that has all the resources, and I would say that over the years, Northwest has had to make some of the most, drastic sacrifices in policing.
May I ask a couple of questions?
Sure.
One of your comments had to do with the chief being familiar with the territory, and that's my paraphrase.
Well, he's lived here all his life, yes.
Well, the new chief. You
Oh, the
talked
new
about
chief.
new chief should.
New chief.
Is it your thought that all things being equal, the mayor and the city manager would be well served with promoting from within or someone from within the community, or can someone come from outside the community, well-trained, well-qualified?
If we
come
have
along?
someone that's equally qualified in the department, I would not have a problem with that. I think that that could be good because we have some problems in Fresno, say the gang situation at generational. It might be good to know something about that. If there's an equally qualified person, I can think of some people that I know that I think would be good. Some of them don't want it, but.
You mentioned also the issue of staffing. I think all of us are familiar, either anecdotally or close up and personal, that sometimes for some level of calls, you are not responded to in a manner that you consider timely.
That's correct.
You referenced a staffing issue. It sounds like more people, more officers. Fair enough?
Well, we need more officers, and we definitely need to get our fair share of them here in Northwest Fresno. And we don't have people, I mean, it goes way back, but I'm living with a problem that should have been taken care of a long time ago.
Here is a concern. The general fund budget this year is $384.83. The police department budget is 180, and you may take off 26 from that. It may come internally, but law enforcement, Fresno Police Department, is getting a substantial bite of the very limited resources. How does a new chief deal with that reality? Is that a political issue, or is that a financial issue?
Well, I think that we need more actual sworn officers doing sworn officer work instead of CSOs running around, you know, telling us to call the police if we see something suspicious. Okay. Because if it's suspicious and you have to wait for 20 minutes to get the call in, no one's going to do it. They don't. And I know this because I spent a lot of time on Neighborhood Watch. So I think that as a priority in this city, we need to trim the fat and run a lean department. But I also think that we need more sworn officers dealing with the problems. Northwest Fresno is getting a lot more crime. In my neighborhood alone this week, we had a guy driving around checking cars. Another house was broken into earlier in the month. And this right here is somebody that was leaving the house across the street.
But you showed a picture. There's, among the lessons that we should take away from this tonight, if you see something, say something. It is not your task or my task to go out and be a Dudley Do-Right. That may seem like a good idea at the moment, but it's not when you find yourself flat on your back because somebody's beat the socks off of you. But if you see something, say something, and you're right. But thank you very much.
I think there's people here that can attest that I've said plenty over the years.
No, thank you very much. Who would like to comment next on any of the 4 questions or any other comments? Sir.
Bring my computer up because I'm looking at an important document that you can find on
Your name is?
Yeah, Wendell, and I live within two blocks of here. Unfortunately, for this particular meeting, I live in a county island, so I don't get to vote for the mayor. I'm going to talk to Wilma about that after the meeting, if you could stay around a couple minutes. So I went on the Fresno Police Department website and saw a personnel survey, and it's a little bit disturbing. I assume the mayor and the city manager are aware of it. It's the 2018, it's the latest that was on the website. I'll mention a few questions and give you how they were answered. Question number 2 pertains to employee morale, and it says low employee morale is a problem in the department, and it says 68% of sworn officers agree with that statement, and 91% of non-sworn officers agree with that statement. It's a bit disturbing, and I would hope the new chief would address perceived morale problems in the force. Another question asked about personal knowledge of reports, affidavits, or testimony falsified by me or another employee. So I have personal knowledge of reports, so on, falsified. 10% of sworn officers say they do have personal knowledge of that. And although 10% is not a lot, maybe, we're talking about false testimony. You, being a judge, I'm sure, would be quite concerned about this. It should be 0, I think.
Let me say this, I don't want to interrupt, but I presided over more than 225 jury trials, 4 years on the criminal courts. I've read 3,500 probable cause determinations, had any number of officers testify. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, thanks. Another question, and by the way, everybody should read the survey, I think. Employees make enforcement decisions based on fear of reprimand, lawsuits, or public scrutiny. How many sworn officers agree with that statement? 74% agree with that statement. So fear of reprimand, lawsuits, or public scrutiny is a motivation, not simply enforcing the law, I take it. The department addresses areas of poor performance. Sworn officers, 40% agree to that, meaning they think the department does not address areas of poor performance. One last one. Members of management, lieutenants, captains, chiefs, lead by example and earn the respect of their employees. Only 54% of sworn officers agree with that statement, and more non-sworn officers agree with that statement. In other words, almost half of the employees believe that the members of management do not lead by example and earn the respect of their employees. I would say all these are very serious concerns that the current police chief should be addressing, but certainly the new one.
So I think it's safe to assume that any person who is a serious candidate for being considered as the new chief will have done his or her research, will have looked in the media files, and will be well familiar with that. I think there was actually at least 2 different media reports and then a response, I think, by Chief Dyer. But all that being said, I think it's fair that anybody being considered will be on top of that. So how would you, if you were the chief, how would you set the tone from the top down so that 50% of some cohort is not saying that things are not all well in River City?
Well,
what would you suggest doing?
I would start by realizing that it looks like we may have a problem here and talk to as many police officers, probably including the officials in the union, about this problem. I'm sure the union, the police union, is, if anything, more concerned about this than I am. And
FPOA, Fresno Police Officers Association. Yeah. Todd Frazier's the running
Start
that
talking
outfit.
to them and say, I've read this survey and it's of great concern to me. I want to ask you questions about it. I want to talk to you about what we might do to improve this so that our 2019 survey, our 2020 survey, has much better results.
So would you be in agreement that the committee that is going to be discussing various issues with the candidate, with the pool of prospects, would that be an area of some significance in your judgment?
Yeah, and I would hope that the Fresno police personnel are going to be involved either in the committee that is formed to make the decisions. I assume there's going to be some sort of advisory committee that will be formed. I would hope that this will include a decent fraction of the employees who work in the department. I work for Fresno City College, and whenever we hire managers, we ensure that faculty and staff that are going to be managed by those people are part of the search committee and have a say in what that person, who that person will be. So I would recommend the same thing here.
You have personnel taking notes, you have Ms. Kwan taking notes, and that is I would agree with you that to have some officer input, both formally and informally, would be very important. All right. Who would like to make another comment? Yes, ma'am. Come on over here. This is a new microphone. And your name and area of town?
Sure. So my name is Marisa. I actually live in a neighborhood near here, but I work at Fresno Barrios Unidos, which is in South Fresno, so District 7, and I coordinate a youth program there. So I'm speaking on behalf of the youth that I work with as well. No worries.
Been around for a long time.
Yes, we've been around since 1994.
What you do, because that's very impressive.
Sure.
Oh, I was asking for her to explain to us what Barrios Unitas does. They have been around town for a long time. They started on Tulare Street right next to the Winton Vista Pharmacy, and they've had a series of committed people for many years. So why don't you tell us just a bit about what you do, and then I want to hear your comments.
Sure, no problem. So Fresno Barrios Unidos, we have been around since 1994. We're currently located across the street from Roosevelt High School. We focus on serving youth and young families in a number of different ways through different programs, support, and then also through an education aspect. So we focus on education, wellness, and advocacy. And I specifically coordinate a youth program for young women and gender nonconforming folks in Fresno. And
This is a very interesting phrase.
Yes.
Non-conforming
yes.
folks.
So gender nonconforming or gender non-binary. So these are individuals who do not identify as male or female or in some other form. And our work really focuses on building leadership, building youth voice and youth power, having youth realize that they can have a say in our city as well. So we have been talking about the police chief's search, been able to discuss this with our youth as well, so I'm here to kind of speak on some of those aspects. So a few things that I do want to highlight today, this is related to schools and as well as accountability. So as
And just everyone knows that every campus in Fresno has a police officer, and they've
Yes.
changed the title in the last year or two, but there is a police presence,
yes.
not as hopefully a negative force, but a positive and conciliatory force. But I'll leave that to you.
Yes, so all high schools as well as Fort Miller Middle School have student resource officers or SROs, and student neighborhood resource officers are at all the middle schools in Fresno Unified. And I do want to bring this to attention, especially to the city manager who is in charge of this police search. So it's important that the chief does understand the aspect of the school to prison pipeline. So this is the phenomenon that happens that when there is increased surveillance and policing on campus, it actually increases the likelihood of a student to be involved with or be in contact with the criminal justice system. Fresno Unified does consistently report in the top Central Valley schools for suspensions, arrests, and referrals. So this is very important that the chief understands this because there is a heightened presence on campuses as well.
Can I ask a question? I don't want to interrupt where you, because it's very important. Am I hearing correctly that there are some who think that having a police presence on the campuses increases a negative intercontact with law enforcement?
Yes, so there are studies and reports out that do show that suspensions, arrests, and referrals do increase with increased officer involvement or officer presence. I can also speak on behalf of the youth that I serve as well, who definitely do feel intimidated as well with a police officer on campus, just to be known that they are in full uniform. They do carry a weapon as well. And there have been different altercations. I do also want to point out that the numbers that are available don't always reflect charter schools, alternative schools, etc. So this is something that is important that the new police chief understands, this idea of the school to prison pipeline and how this affects our students in the community, Fresno Unified as well as Central Unified. Both districts do give money to or have contracts with Fresno PD in order to have officers on campus. And
Can I just ask one question on that topic before
Yes.
you go on? Based on your experience and those with whom you interact, would your thought be that there should be less of a presence on campus by the Fresno Police Department, or it should be more, I'm going to say training, for lack of a better term, to help the police department have more positive interactions with the students?
so I can't give a full answer to that at this time. However, something that would be awesome, and this is also going into my next point, is to have a youth commission for the police chief. So a youth commission or youth committee to provide input, to provide insight on the aspects of this. This did exist at some point, although it kind of changed in its form, and now it is at Fresno Unified kind of on an alternating basis. But it's also important to remember that there are a lot of students who are in charter schools, alternative schools, who may not be in school as well. We identify youth as 12 to 24. So there is a large age gap who's also not specifically in Fresno Unified Schools as well.
I may be mistaken. I know I thought at one time there was a youth commission. That may have been within the city of Fresno. So
Yes.
But if there is not, you would suggest that the new chief give consideration to I'll call it a youth commission?
Sure.
But what I'm also hearing you say is not just Fresno, McLean, Roosevelt, Bullard, or South Central, but with the alternative schools where, frankly, there are substantially more proportionally kids that have challenges. Fair enough?
Yes, so it's definitely important to consider those schools, different alternative or continuation schools, as well as those who may not be in school right now for whatever reason, whether they didn't complete the graduation or they have graduated. Again, it is important to take those youth into consideration. We definitely want to make sure that youth voices are heard and youth concerns are heard when it comes to policing. And then the last point is really just on that note that it is important to fully know with the new chief when they come in to establish means of accountability and transparency. As was mentioned before, the budget or proposed budget was 183 million, I think, but it's roughly around 48 to 49% of the general fund. So it's important that community members know how this money is being used, that there is transparency in this use of money as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for what you're doing in the community that you serve.
Thank you.
It's very cool. Next. Rules still apply, but I don't want to dig down into the audience. Yes, sir.
If I turn this around. Thank you. My name is Dennis. I live in the Herndon and Marks area. I see on your flyer here that you have some questions here. What's the most important thing to look for in the next chief? Most important thing to look for is somebody who can communicate and listen.
Those, by the way, are two different things.
Okay, I understand that. But he's got to be able to communicate to the public as to what's going on, and I have to give Jerry Dyer credit. He's not one to hide behind his badge. He will be out there talking to you. Sometimes I think he talks too much. As a lawyer, I know that. So,
it's in our DNA. We can't.
But he has a group. This person will have a group of people that they need to deal with. We have tons of different groups in Fresno, and he's got to be able to deal with all of them. And he also needs to be able to sort out the people that are just giving him false information or personal or information that they are using for their own good as opposed to something good for the whole city. The other thing is he's got to get up on the job as quickly as possible. Mayor Brand, when you came into office, at least you knew most of the people that you were dealing with. If you bring in somebody from outside, they're going to have a monumental task of trying to get up to speed as who's the players, who we're dealing with, and what do we got to do to get going here, okay? They also are going to have to work with Sheriff Mims, the DA office, and all of the other law enforcement communities that we've got here. We also need to make sure that they have the resources to perform what they need to perform. Now, I'm not advocating a tax, because I do not want a police tax. I'm on record for that. But we do need to check our budget and try and give these people as much time and effort as we can to get this going. Also, in going on a nationwide search, I think we need to be careful. California has its own unique sets of problems, thanks to Governor Newsom and the rest of the legislature. They need to be aware of that. They need to be familiar with working for it, so that the people understand what the police can and cannot do. I know in my neighborhood we're getting a big sense of resignation that we're on our own, because there are a lot of things going on that don't show up on these statistics. Quite frankly, I don't feel safer now than I did 10 years ago, even though all of these statistics are going down, because there's a whole criminal element out there that is not being prosecuted. Okay, thank you.
Well, let me ask a couple of follow-ups if I can. The last question first. There is a criminal element that are not being prosecuted, and without getting in the weeds on Prop 47 and all of those various
Prop 36.
things. The 36, and it goes on. What can a police chief do to address that issue?
That is part of the
Remember,
problem.
police arrest, prosecutors prosecute.
That's correct. Police chief can communicate. This is what, the fourth or fifth largest city in the state? Fifth? Okay? That's a position of power. They need to communicate to the government from this position what the problems are and try and get somebody to listen up there. I know it's almost an impossible task, but somebody's got to listen, hopefully sooner rather than later.
Next. Ma'am, you're taking very careful notes. Would you like to say something? Okay. You're taking very good notes. All right. It might be appreciated. Yeah. Oh, fair enough. That's a fair statement, to follow up with what the present chief is doing. Do you belong to the Jerry Dyer fan club? I heard Jerry speak the other day, and there is a Jerry Dyer fan club. Honest to goodness. Okay. More questions or comments? Ma'am, anything you would like to say? Okay. Anything you would like to say? Come on up. Well, that's all right. And your name and the area?
Sure. My name is Aline. I live in 93704, but I have a 100-year-old mom who lives in 93706, and I'm trying to make sure that I attend all these meetings. I just want to say that if we are going to bring somebody from the outside in this search for the chief of police, I think they should take time, and I know this sounds crazy, but I really think that they should take some time and live for a couple of months minimum in some of the more challenging parts of the city, so that they could get a taste of what the citizens who live in those zip codes go through. When the young lady talked about the school to prison pipeline, this is a very real thing. I work with Fresno Freedom School, and this is very serious. So we're starting out with them when they're little, hoping that they can avoid incarceration. And I just want to say that if there is additional training that goes on with our sworn police officers, that it should be in the purview of the citizens and not just what's already happening, because that is not working for people of color in the city of Fresno. The intimidation that the young lady talked about is very real. And a lot of children who get suspended and expelled from school, who are sent to continuation schools, don't finish school at all. So we're dealing with a whole population who don't have education. And that is ripe for breaking the law and getting into trouble. And this is a community-wide problem. So I just wanted to say that.
That was said very well. You know, we don't know what we don't know. And all of us have some ideas. We've seen the 4 questions, but you have a terrific idea. The new chief should not only go on a listening tour, the new chief should go on a living tour. You know? So, no, I'm serious as a toothache. That's a, you know, that has happened in various businesses and industries before, where the head shed will actually go out and be with the people. That is a very cool idea. So, any other cool ideas? Yes, ma'am.
Sylvia.
Oh, no, go ahead. They want to see you.
Oh, do they?
Absolutely.
Sylvia, I live a couple blocks away. I think most of us don't meet the police chief. We meet an individual officer. And I am wondering if they would have put a special emphasis on any plans, innovative ideas for getting policemen out of ruts they may have, biases, et cetera, that they may have developed over the years that need to be readjusted I was
In the
wondering.
military, that's called an attitude adjustment.
Attitude adjustment, okay. Because I do think that most of our opinions about policemen are derived from the guy who comes to our door, or who doesn't come to our door, perhaps, or meets us in the car. So I would like to see if they think the morale is so bad, and if people are complaining about the police, they usually mean the policeman, not the guy on top, what he can do to, or does he have some special abilities training for attitude adjustment, if needed?
Well, let me follow up on that with you. Don't sit down. There's been a lot of ink spilled on the concept of community-based policing. And in our stereotype, I think we might think of the officer who walked the streets and swung his, in those days, his billy club, et cetera, knew everybody. There are challenges, without getting into the weeds, to that. We have 1,280 some odd calls. The law enforcement has 1,280 some odd calls a day. They are stretched a little bit thin, I think, fairly stated. But what I'm hearing you say, if they can reach out a little bit more.
More, yes, okay. And perhaps more effectively.
Okay. They say more effectively. How would you suggest moving out more effectively?
I'm not sure.
That's
Thank
okay.
God I'm not running for police chief.
Well.
But I think the police chief should come in with ideas about it.
Okay.
So
You talked about, you said it more gracefully, attitude adjustment. Is it a fair statement that, given some of the things we've heard this evening, that everybody needs to sit down and take a deep breath and maybe examine the way they do things?
well, yes. Matter of fact, that's a marvelous time when a new man comes in.
Or woman.
Excuse me, or woman comes in. New person comes in to do many. It's easier to make some big changes at that moment. I'm thinking of particularly what I don't know what the feeling is of policemen in general or the police chief regarding. The cameras they're supposed to carry on their backs or on their chest or wherever they carry them. Is this something that's going to make behavior much more transparent, or isn't it such a good idea? I'd like to know the police chief's understanding and opinion of that kind of a thing.
Great question. Anecdotal evidence and anecdotal stories are most dangerous. I can say to an absolute certainty that a number of officers who are on patrol on the street think that cameras have been the greatest help to doing their job that has happened in a long time.
Oh, good.
So
we're using them. I mean,
now that's anecdotal, and there's
right.
issues and all that, but that's a wonderful thing because that camera works both ways.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
I imagine that. Yes.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
We're getting kind of a high bar of questions, but don't be. Yes, ma'am. Come on.
One of the things I think she was alluding to is I think that, and one of the things I tried to allude to, probably didn't make it as clear, but over time sometimes there's an attitude that Northwest Fresno people aren't getting killed over here, so it's not as important to be over here. Sometimes if you have a problem, you need to get a posse to get it solved. You can't just be a person that happens to observe, be the one that takes the time to observe. So I do think there is some of that needs to be done. Sometimes there have been, people make statements like, why don't you move when you're living across from a felon? I know a deputy chief has said that to me. So I do think there are some things
that was not a good statement for that person to have made.
No, it wasn't
Period.
a good statement, and it's been made by people lower also. And so I do think that there does need to be some readjustment, because I think there's been this attitude in Fresno, and it comes across in many different areas. Oh, the North has all the money. I don't know too many people where I live that don't work. They have businesses, they work for 10 hours a day, they come home. they don't pay attention much to what the police are doing. They assume that if they call, they'll get somebody. And a lot of people are misinformed about what the police can and can't do. I do very much agree with her on that issue, because right now they're complaining on Nextdoor saying somebody, there was some crime, package stealing. And they're saying, well, the police won't do anything about it. Well, I'm sorry, you voted for that, unfortunately, under misguided things, and the police probably can't do anything if your package isn't $900, and they probably won't do anything because it's not as big of a crime. So we need more police doing more proactive things, and we do need to have them feel that our crimes in the Northwest section may not be murder, but they're just as important to us as crimes on other areas.
So what I'm hearing you say again, and this has been alluded to, is that all crimes are important if you're the victim.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm saying that we have things in this area of town that people don't think that we have. I've lived across the street from a drug house and a convicted felon for 20 years, and he's still a convicted felon, and he acts like a convicted felon. So I know what it is to go toe-to-toe with a bulldog. So other areas don't have, and I couldn't, at that time, that was prior to Chief Dyer, but I called for help. I couldn't even get it. So there's a misperception out here that we don't have any crime in Northwest, and it needs to be addressed. And I think that the troops need to know that, it's just as invasive when somebody goes into your house and pilfers through your things, which is happening quite a bit these days. We need to do something. And I do think that the mayor and the new chief need to get together. They said, I remember Mayor Brand said when he was running for office he was going to get together with other cities to try to get together and solve problems. They need to go to Sacramento and say these things aren't working. We're living in a lawless state run by a lawless person, and we're going to continue to have lawlessness if we don't get a handle on it.
Is it fair to say there's a thread that you surfaced again, and we've heard it before, that yes, we're looking for a new police chief, and yes, there are improvements that can be made, and yes, there are new ideas living in every neighborhood for a couple of months. That's the most cool idea of all. But some of these issues are beyond the scope of a police officer on the street or someone in the corner office. I'm not trying to gloss over it.
I'm going to say that the problems that we have traditionally had in some certain areas of town that have been complained about for many years, those problems are all in Northwest Fresno now. We have homelessness, we have crime, we have, on any given night, there's neighborhoods all up and down from my area. They're posting videos, people looking in their mailboxes, people looking in their cars. You can't even put a letter in the Marks and Herndon, that mailbox for the post office. There's glue, there's sticks. Every day they're stealing stuff out of that thing.
You're very up to speed on the latest way to get stuff out of the mailbox, then.
Well, no, but I'm out there. If I'm home, I'm out there getting my mail, because even though I have a supposedly locked box, mail is not safe. So there's a lot of crime going on. Some of it's small, but the problem is it's been allowed to go on for so long. People aren't getting arrested. They're getting cited. And crimes that used to be, I think what my husband was saying is that they say crime is down, but things that used to be crimes aren't crimes anymore. You can go in and steal $900 worth of stuff. I was in Winco there on Shaw just before Christmas, and I watched a guy go in and steal candy on a Sunday morning just before Christmas. I knew it was happening because I've heard about it. It's the most disconcerting thing you can ever see, and the clerks knew that he was going to do it. They said, he's going to go over to produce, get a drink, and walk out with it. So I'm watching produce, then I realize he's gone down the candy aisle. The guy just took a handful of the stuff. He didn't even bother to put it in his pocket and just walked out the same way it came in.
Let me ask another question. You have been obviously very involved in the community, your community, very involved with the adjunct police work, if you will. What would you suggest to encourage more folks to volunteer?
I don't think you can make people volunteer. That was one of my big frustrations. But another thing that was extremely frustrating was during the time that I was on the Neighborhood Watch and Chiefs Board, I had a drug problem. Keith Foster was my captain. And I wasn't the only drug problem that didn't get solved during that time, because I saw people bring posses in, and theirs didn't get solved either. So people get discouraged when they call and nothing happens. People get discouraged. If I'm pretty, I built my house, I saved money to live in that house. We didn't just have some silver spoon. We worked, we went to school. I'm very tired of the way Northwest Fresno gets portrayed in the paper, and I don't feel that our leaders do enough to stick up for us over here. I feel like we've done without policing for a long time. I feel like a lot of police in this area feel like, well, people are getting killed on the other side of town, and you're complaining about a theft or, you know, something like that. And I mean, I have to say, it was a very discouraging. I followed this guy through the entire court system, and it was a very, very disappointing experience. I'm sorry to say.
No, you would not be the only person. Let me ask this. If a new chief or the chief staff, and, you know, we're buried in statistics, and, you know, statistics figure and
Figures,
all
lie,
that
and liars
stuff.
figure, got it.
Would it be of any, not of any comfort, because none of us are comfortable when somebody doesn't come by when we have a call. But if you knew that in the northwest quadrant where we live, which, by the way, goes out to Highway City.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I know
Which,
exactly.
by the way,
I know what the boundaries are.
there is some just anecdotal discussion that with the good work that's been done in Southwest to root out the gangs, some of the gang members
Have
moved
come north.
to the
I'm
Northwest
very
to
aware of that.
live with their girlfriends. So would it help, though, if you had access to a statistics that would say, okay, from 4 to midnight, or whatever the 10 is for the swing or graveyard or AM shift, there were X number of officers on duty assigned to Northwest, and they had X number of calls, and that calls were, you know, they
Oh, I've been on ride-alongs.
Okay,
I've
so
seen how few officers there are for Northwest.
But also the degree of which an officer can respond to many of those things that you reference. I'm not saying it'll change anybody's mind or make any difference, but knowledge is power.
I think we do need to have more knowledge, which is one of the things I alluded to at the first, is that I think we need to know where the money comes from and how it's being spent, which districts. I would like to know what the boundaries are. I do know what the boundaries are, but I mean, for a while there, we didn't even have a district station in our area when the boundaries shrunk after they'd been expanded during the crash. I mean, we already had the biggest thing, and then they expanded it when they got rid of the central division. I'm pretty up on who's getting the resources.
Okay,
so
perfect.
all I'm saying is, if we're going to have community policing, it needs to be in all 5 districts. It needs to be equal. We're paying our taxes over here, and we have problems. I've got the homeless that are very persistent at Marks and Herndon. Captain Farrah's been helpful with that. He's tried, but they're back. I'd like to talk to him about that again tonight. I've got a homeless guy.
Don't point at your husband.
No. The picture I showed you. I mean, that guy was there to buy drugs.
Yeah.
And there's Friday night, I'm working in my yard. I look up, there's a guy that's homeless that comes on a bike, and he's sitting on the bench waiting for the guy to come home. This is my reality. Nobody, I mean, I've had to go toe-to-toe with the Bulldogs. So, I'm sorry. I think that Northwest is entitled to their share. And I really want to make that clear.
I think that is more than duly noted. Thank you very much, though. Next. All the shy people are done, so now we want other folks. Yes, sir. Name and neighborhood.
My name's Rick. I live a block that way.
Turn around so everybody can see what a handsome young man you are.
Careful. So I work with a broad diversity of people throughout the city, and a concern that I think would not only be relevant to them, but to all of the questions I've heard, is finding someone who is able to embrace an acceptable apparatus for civilian oversight. A lot of people want to make sure that the civilian population has oversight into the management of the police department. We've looked at the Office of Independent Review, and and some people, I think, are satisfied with it, and some people are not. We want a chief who not only is willing to work with it, but embraces the need for that to help build confidence all throughout the city in how that's able to not only provide oversight, but part of the channel of communication back and forth between the department and the population.
The chief has, I understand, and I'll get the name wrong, but a police advisory commission, that's close, that by design is diverse racially, neighborhoods, et cetera. If you're familiar with that, is that a step in the right direction? Should that be expanded? What are your thoughts?
Well, I know that friends of mine who have and do serve on that commission are advocating very strongly for a strong apparatus of civilian oversight. So I don't have the direct details on how they feel about that commission, but I do know that they are pushing for a good process of civilian oversight.
So some of the folks with whom you interact would be of the mind that there should be greater civilian, in addition to the OIR, the Office of Independent Review, the people should have a greater hand in, I'll say this inartfully, running the department, or offering suggestions, or analyzing, or help me with that.
What I would say is they have not been satisfied with how the Office of Independent Review has functioned. I have not personally interacted with it, but I can report for the benefit of others that they have not been satisfied. So not necessarily different than that process, but one that they find will function better.
Thank you very much. And thank your friends and neighbors for participating. You know, it's easy to sit on the sidelines and say, boy, that really sucks. And it's, as we've seen tonight, there are people that are getting into the trenches, reaching out and making things better, or making the rest of us more knowledgeable. More comments? Yes, ma'am. Well, here, let me come to you then. All right. Okay, this is a full-service operation. Yes, ma'am.
This is the last minute that's saying. Hello.
Your name is? First name?
Faye is the first name.
Your neighborhood is this name?
No, it isn't. I'm right across the street from Tenaya Junior High.
Well, it's kind of this neighborhood, right down the street from Ford.
Okay, and there is a policeman across the street. And we have cars constantly all up and down the whole street.
Police cars?
No, other cars going fast, dropping children off and stuff, and I sit and watch that morning, noon, and night whenever they're doing that. I'm afraid one of those kids is going to get killed. And then they all drop their cats off. I have 20 cats at one time, and I don't know what to do with all of them. People keep complaining, so I just keep feeding them. I will, and now I'll have baby cats. But I also have kids that I raised. My husband and I worked real hard. We had 3-4 jobs. I started working when I was 13, and I'm from a big city. So I see this big city. It was a joke when we drove in town. We kept getting transferred, and we ended up here. He's passed since that time, but I think that what you need is more communication, and maybe somebody from a bigger city come in.
Help me, you said more communication. Communication from the top down or from all levels? Okay. Now all of us who have had children that we drop off at school because nobody lets their kids walk to school anymore. All of us understand the drag strip that is the exit point from where moms or dads or caregivers drop off their kids. Is that a fair oversight? Okay, well, okay. So one of the things that I'm hearing you say, I think, is that law enforcement within their capacity needs to pay more attention to neighborhoods that are high risk in terms of safety.
And maybe it should go from the parents all the way up to
Okay, now we're talking about parents, so let's not, some of us are kind of sensitive about that.
Educator here telling us about it.
I want to say,
I raised 2 kids, put them both through Berkeley. They got themselves to be good jobs, and one's already retired. What do you think of that?
well, I think that's very
Yay!
cool. Yeah. There is something, though, that I've noted. In line with safety,
Yeah.
I'll find it. The issue of vehicle safety and driver and passenger safety is significant. We all understand that. Based on the Fresno Police Department website, there have been a reduction in traffic collision injuries of 39% between 2002 and 2013. And there has been a 42% decrease in traffic collision fatalities between 2002 and 2013. Now, the reality is, why did that happen? Because in 2002, Chief Dyer said, we're going to put more officers out of their cars and we're going to have more Zoomers. Those are people that ride motorcycles. And they have other names. And there's also a marked decrease, I believe, well, for sure, in driving under the influence, et cetera. But that has happened because of exactly, I suggest, what you said. There was all kinds of stuff going on.
Who to call or what to do. I've watched them during their after-school hours and on Saturday, Sunday, whenever, get their little bicycles, the little two-wheeler things, you know, and they go up on the school somehow, the kids, and I've seen mine.
Yeah. Well, at least they're not on the top of the roof breaking in and stealing computers at 2 in the morning. Well, that also out there. Thank you. Well, we don't want kids or adults to be hurting themselves. Other comments? You're telling the right people. There has to be somebody that has the unasked question, the unstated comment, that you're going to go home and say, why didn't I say something? I'm studiously avoiding calling on law enforcement or members of the media, but that's a topic for another day. Well, is there anyone else, before we call on Mayor Lee to close us up, anybody else who would like to say anything? I won't attempt to summarize because I've not been taking notes, but what I've heard is increased communication, attention to detail, my word, perhaps a mindful attitude, if not an adjustment, an attitude sensitivity, I don't want to sound real touchy-feely, among the street officers, greater communication with what is happening, a police chief that understands this city or can learn darn fast. I'm sure there are other subtleties to that, but those and the studious notes are taken, and they will be digested, and there's going to be 4 more of these sessions, as well as a litany of other listening sessions. Somebody mentioned the FP, Fresno Police Officers Association. I think it is probably a fair statement that they will have something to say at some point. If not, it'd be the first time in the history of personkind that they haven't, but that's another issue too. Mayor Lee, come on up. I just want to, as a volunteer, thank you all for taking the time to show up tonight. To a person, your comments were well thought out, well delivered, courteously delivered, and given all of us great food for thought. Lee?
First of all, give this guy a big thanks. I've known him for probably 40 years. We were in the Air National Guard together many, many years ago.
Lee and I were in the Air National Guard, 5425 East McKinley Avenue, 194th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. Mayor Brand was a sergeant, and I was lieutenant colonel. It goes to show you that Peter Principal lived then and lives now.
I want to thank everybody for coming out, and we are taking notes on what your ideas are. And to clarify a few things, one is there will be people that are currently on the police force applying for this position. So it'll be a national search. It will not exclude existing people that want to apply. Second thing is, when I was on the campaign trail, I also said, back then we had a part-time police auditor who lived in Colorado. I said I would make a full-time police auditor who would have to live in the city of Fresno and hire somebody to have outreach and communicate with the community, which I've done. I also promised a Citizens Public Safety Advisory Board, which I did form in 2017. So again, this is a long process. Thank you for coming, and in the end, everybody in the city of Fresno is going to have a say in who we hire as a new chief. Thank you.
And just as Lee, thank you very much for what you've done. And Wilma Kwan, city manager, Herden Katz has a brand new description in your job over there. You know, without being corny about this, we started this discussion with the first presenter talking about people working together. If we take one thing, and it's kind of a high and mighty idea, we all fit together. That sign that's on the wall over there. And if everybody will pay a little bit of mindful attention, doing more than what we're all, and you're here now because you're interested, we will make this city a better place in which to live. Thank you all for coming.